Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar from the TUC. We're going to give it a minute or two just to let the Zoom room fill up. I can see the hundreds of you are already joining. We're just hit 100 now. There's going to be loads more coming. We'll give it 90 seconds, 2 minutes, just to let everyone join us here. You're all very welcome. Please introduce yourself in the chat panel while we wait for everyone to come. So, hi everyone who's just joined us. We will be getting going in about a minute. We're just waiting for the Zoom room to fill up. It's great to see so many of you joining us here today. Please say hi in the chat while we wait for everyone to get here with us online. Okay, I will start with a little bit of housekeeping while we're waiting for others to join us. So, you're all very welcome to today's webinar. I'm Anna from the TUC, and I'm joined by three fantastic speakers. We've got Quinn Roach, my colleague here at the TUC. We've got Colleen Johnson from the NEU and Martin Gwether from Unite. Colleen and Martin are the TUC's Disabled Workers Committee co-chairs, and Quinn is our policy officer leading on disability and LGBT plus. So we'll be hearing from them shortly. So if it's your first time on a webinar, you can see that the chat is already very busy. We love to see where you're from, your union, your name there in the chat. Please also use it to exchange any tips and ideas with other viewers on the webinar. We are also recording today. So if you miss anything or you've got to leave early, don't worry. We will make sure you are sent a link to the recording, and any resources that Quinn, Colleen and Martin mention, we will put the link in the chat, and we'll also send that to you in an email either later today or first thing tomorrow. So you're not gonna you won't miss anything if you don't get to note it down straight away. We have live captions on today's webinar. At the bottom of the video screen, there's a button that says show captions. If you click that, you'll be able to follow what we're saying with the captions. And we are saving some time for questions to our speakers. So do post any questions you've got in the Q&A panel. That's underneath the video. It's a speech bubble that has a question mark in it, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can after we've heard from each of our panelists. So today's webinar is about disability in the workplace, and specifically how you as union reps can both support disabled colleagues in the workplace and work towards changing the culture in the workplace. So we're going to hear from Quinn first, who is going to share with us some information and based on some research that the TUC has done this year, and it's shown us lots of information about what really is going on in the workplace. I'm sure many of you have got experiences of this, so do share with us in the chat. So Quinn, can you tell us a little bit, please, about some of the barriers that this research has shown up?
Oh, that's a really good question. And actually, I think the first thing we should talk about is disabled workers' experiences. So actually, what we've done in the last 12 months is we did a couple of research projects looking at access to reasonable adjustments and also experiences of bullying, discrimination, and harassment. And actually, the first thing they threw up was that actually, in the whole, disabled workers are really uncomfortable talking about their impairment, their health condition, or their disability. And so just over a third told us that that was a real issue. And 1 in 5 told us actually they hadn't told their employer they were disabled. And we're like, well, why aren't you telling your why? What's happening here? And 6 in 10 said it was because they were worried there would be negative repercussions from telling their employer. And just over a third said they were really worried their employer would think they could not do their job. So there's some real issues around even just being open about being disabled. Um, to the point where actually 1 in 5 disabled workers, so 20, well, actually just over, so 22% said they weren't happy with the support they were getting from their manager or supervisor anyway, and around the same level said they were unhappy with career progression. So, we're talking about barriers, and the first one that I would really highlight is just the ability to be open and talk about your disability and to therefore make requests for reasonable adjustments.
Thanks, Quinn. And we will be coming back to some of these issues in a bit later on. We're just hearing what we found out from the research first of all. So, Quinn, is there anything else from the research, or more generally throughout the year, that you can share with us about the experiences of disabled workers?
Well, I think we should really focus on reasonable adjustments, those being kind of one of the most important things that we deal with as reps and as trade unions. So I think if you're in this room and you're aware of how the equality team operate, we do an equality audit every 2 years to understand what reps are dealing with and what equality issues they're dealing with. And actually, this year we found that 55% of trade union reps had supported a member who was trying to get or put in place a reasonable adjustments. So that is, I think, one of the biggest issues for us as a movement, but also a big issue for disabled workers as well. So in this research we did, we polled 1,000 disabled workers across the country, all the regions, across the sectors, really um, robust in terms of research and polling. And what we found was actually around 37% of those workers who took part had put in a request for reasonable adjustments, and we thought that was low. So we asked them, we asked why people hadn't done it, and actually 53% said they hadn't put in a request because they didn't need it. But what that shows is that 47% of people who have not put in a request for reasonable adjustment actually need a reasonable adjustment. There's a big proportion of disabled workers who aren't getting the reasonable adjustments they need, and some of those barriers I mentioned about disclosure really are brought into stark light when we talk about this kind of thing. Um, and so we found, we want to find out then about like what happens when you put in a request. Um, so we found out that over half of disabled workers who had put in a request had only had some or none of their adjustments put in place. So we find that even when a disabled worker is making that request, they aren't getting the adjustments they require. And another issue, and I'm sure if you're in this call and you're a rep, you'll have dealt with this, um, is that it's the length of time to get all the adjustments that have been requested. So actually what we found was that 8 in 10 disabled workers who had put in a request waited in excess between 4 months and to over a year to have their agreed adjustments put in place. And that's just too long. It's massively too long. And if you think about it, if you're a new worker coming in, you will be in your probation period and you won't have the adjustments you need to do your job properly, and you'll be assessed over that time period. So it's a real issue for us, and I think, we need to take it very seriously. Um, and so, there's a group of people who are waiting a long period of time, and then there's a group of people who've put in a request who've never been told the outcome. 1 in 5 disabled workers who've made a request are still waiting and they never hear back. So another real issue for us to kind of as a movement, um, yeah, to address. And I think it's really quite depressing when you think about the fact that the duty to put in place reasonable adjustments has existed for 30 years. So it's not new. This isn't new legislation we're trying to get around our heads around. 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Quinn. I mean, some of the statistics that you told us there as a result of the research are really, really worrying. Perhaps those of us who are reps or who deal with these issues, it's not a shock, which again, that's not good either, is it? In fact, if we're not surprised, that's worrying as well. We've been mentioning this research. The link was put in the chat, and we will make sure you all get sent that as well in the email follow-up email to this session. The TUC also has a short guide that my team worked on with Quinn about reasonable adjustment passports. We will make sure you all get sent the link to those as well, because as reps, this is a really useful tool if you're supporting members who want to ask for an adjustment. So, Quinn, have we learned anything about pay from this research with disabled workers?
Yeah, we have, there are two, well, not pay, but there are two other things I want to bring to your attention, which I think are really important parts of this puzzle. One is about bullying, discrimination, and harassment. So, it's a part of our core work to understand how disabled workers are being treated. And so we also polled 1,000 disabled workers, really robust to find out their experiences. And we found out that nearly half of disabled workers were reporting bullying, discrimination, and harassment. And then when we looked at it really detailedly, we found out that actually 40%, or, 4 in 10 are being subject to disability-related mistreatment in the workplace. So, that's really problematic treatment. And, that includes, offensive questioning about impairments, jokes or banter about disabled workers, verbal abuse and physical threats. And that's all happening in the workplace, and it really shouldn't be. Um, and then we kind of wanted to understand like the impact that was having, and we know it's having a massively negative impact on mental health. It's impacting disabled workers' beliefs in their ability to do their own jobs, so the workplace confidence. And fundamentally, it impacts on their performance as well. 31% said the bullying that they experienced impact on their performance. So a lot of work for us to do behind that. And I know I don't want to take up too much time because we have real experts in this room that you will want to hear from very quickly. But in terms of the other things we had, I'm just having a quick look through my notes to try to remind myself of what's most important to tell you. Oh, so we wanted to know how these were being dealt with, so actually fewer than 1 in 4 reported the most recent incident of bullying harassment. So this is it's really not being reported in the workplace. And when it is, it's not appropriately investigated. And some disabled workers are telling us that their complaints were completely ignored. So, there's a lot there that we still need to deal with. And then you mentioned pay, which is our other really big thing. And I don't like to talk about pay gaps without mentioning employment gaps. So we know disabled workers are less likely to be in work. There's a big focus from the government on trying to address that. But at the same time, when disabled workers are in work, they're paid less than their non-disabled peers. Um, so this year, I think it was November 12th, we marked Disability Pay Gap Day, and what we had found was that disabled workers on average earn £2.40 less an hour than their non-disabled peers, and that's roughly 15.5%. And when we looked at the data for disabled women and compared it with the earnings of non-disabled men, the pay gap is 27.3% or 3.3 pound 80. So, our core work, getting reasonable adjustments, dealing with bullying, discrimination, harassment, and making sure our members get equal pay, and that is still our focus. But some good things on the horizon, including disability pay gap reporting, which we've been campaigning for 8 years, and I thank everyone here for their aid in campaigning for it. But yeah, that's our new research, and I hope it helps inform your work.
Absolutely does, Quinn. And actually, before I move on to Colleen, this my bad. Something I had on my notes that I meant to say in the intro is the reason we're doing this webinar now is because it's Disability History Month. We haven't just picked this date randomly. We're doing it for a reason. So there are. I think it's this week one of the month. It's not a calendar month, right? It's from a date in November to a date in December.
Yeah, the
So
20th of November to the
yeah,
20th of December.
absolutely. So it's just anything you want to add about Disability History Month, Quinn? As this webinar is part of our work on that.
No, I think we are doing what we as trade unionists do, focusing on the workplace and ensuring our members get good treatment as well as all of disabled workers. And I'm just thanking of 300 people who've taking part that they've shown up to kind of mark the month and also learn about the most pressing issues.
Absolutely. And yes, as Quinn says, there's nearly 300 people live with us, but lots of people we know watch the recording as well. I think there's over 600 people have signed up to be involved in that. So there'll be lots of people being able to learn as well. So I'm going to move on to some questions for you now, Colleen. As I mentioned at the beginning, Colleen is from the NEU, and she is, along with Martin, co-chairs the TUC's Disabled Workers Committee. So, Colleen, Quinn touched on this a little bit about self-ID and disclosure. Can you talk a little bit more about that, maybe why people don't and what the consequences are?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and hi, Anna. Yeah. as Quinn pointed out, the research suggests that about 1 in 4 workers generally are disabled. And so, the ID figures really within unions should be between 20 and 25%. And for most unions, it's nowhere near that. It's linked to ID in the workplace as well. Although unions don't inform employers that somebody is disabled, that's important. We've got to say that, and we've got to look really more closely at why people choose to not ID. Because the figures are just not indicative of that 20-25%. And that includes, non-apparent impairments and mental health and all sorts of things. And there is a number of reasons, but the fear of intimidation or harassment is very real at work. And I think for some workers as well, there's a fear of there's a lack of understanding from colleagues. The term favoritism. Why are they being treated better? Is really unhelpful. I think some people don't realise, they're disabled, and some people, for some older people, I think there's still a little bit of shame attached to it. It's a little bit of, they're not quite a politicised disabled person yet, but mainly it's fear of the in the workplace of basically of being harassed and intimidated. So I think that's why. And if I can go on really to talk about how intense work can be. I know,
Yes, please.
so in my profession, education is really intense. Many of our workplaces, and like many other workers in across the country, across the UK, are working long hours, really intense, in the workplace and at home, and breaks are limited. And there's a good deal of inflexibility in many workplaces. And I think this is also behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know you're from the NEU, so an education background, but I think this work intensity can be applied to multiple sectors as to why people don't disclose. So Quinn also touched on reasonable adjustments
Yeah.
and the massive amount of time it might take to have something put in place, and other hurdles and difficulties. Can you talk a bit more, Colleen, about the detail of that, whether we've got any examples, and as well as the difficulties, what are some best practice on how we can overcome those?
Yeah. I mean, for me, there's, as I say, this inflexibility and intensity at work is where it begins. And then, such a lot of people, the adjustments they require do not cost the earth. It is not, as I say, it is not putting a lift in a historically old building. For most people, the adjustments cost very little. Sometimes they don't cost anything. It can be where somebody works, nearer to a bathroom. It can be slightly adjusting their timetable, that they do something different than going to do break duties or whatever. So many things are very small. And I do think that, people become, worried that it's going to be really costly or it's going to be really, they're going to stick out, they're going to stand out. And I think, honestly, many adjustments help other people as well. So we approach what we call, universal accessibility, where you help lots of people. You might in schools and workplaces like that, you might help disabled young people, you might help parents, you might help disabled governors. I think one of the ways is to say, well, look, it makes the workplace better for lots of people. And actually, it means that for employees in the future, it's a more accessible workplace. And I think it's more open and it's more honest. And to there is help when funding is an issue. There's it's not ideal access to work, but there's PIP. So there's other mechanisms that can help. But this long wait or this just being told no is not acceptable and it's not helping.
Absolutely, Colleen. Um, I'm going to ask you something a little bit extra about reasonable adjustments.
Hmm.
Can we sometimes say that an adjustment doesn't always have to be a physical, tangible thing? It might be a behavior change amongst other colleagues. Because I think, from my experience of talking to reps or talking to people who've maybe requested adjustments, they're not always like a thing. It might just be changing the way you do something. So I think it's important we remind people that not to rule out those as adjustments. I'm just trying to think of other examples, but maybe you can off the top of your head, other than things that are behaviour changes rather than a
Yeah, I mean,
piece of
the most
equipment.
obvious one is disability leave or a clause in your sickness absence policy. Because actually, to me, it's discriminatory to treat everybody the same in terms of sickness absence when some people have impairments and some people don't. So just to do that, and the very best practice says, we will not mark anything against you that's related to your impairment because that wouldn't be fair. So all the usual stuff, the tummy upsets or the colds or whatever, as long as it's not related to your impairment, then that's fine. That can be noted down. But actually, to treat everybody the same is just not right. So that's one thing. That to me is a sign of a great employer. If somebody says, at interview, well, why should I consider working for you? What is it about your company that you're really proud of, or your workplace, or whatever? Well, if you've got policies like that, it shows me that you've been thinking and that you're a fair employer. And I'm more likely to want to work for you and be happy in that workplace and be more productive as a worker. So that's just one thing. But like I say, there's things like, not expecting somebody to go out on the playground and do duty. Maybe they can do a job inside. Maybe they can, they're sat down doing something, they deal with, minor things like, children that needs a plaster or needs a cold compress or what nothing that's but something that does not rely on them to be walking around in the cold and not having a break at all or whatever. Another one is if a worker is away and for a while needs to go part-time, not permanently, but just part-time. It would be quite nice if they could be paid their usual pay because it's just an interim problem. And then again, that looks really good, doesn't it? That's just a workplace, a manager that's putting in that thought and that commitment and that investment in that worker. And these things make a lot
Yeah,
of difference.
absolutely. Thank you, Colleen. And a, a number of suggestions have appeared in the chat while we were having that discussion of other adjustment things that are behaviour changes as well as a physical adjustment. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss about sickness absence? You touched on it just then, but was there anything else you wanted to talk about in relation to maybe some of the things Quinn mentioned in the research?
I mean, I would say in the NEU, disabled members probably account for almost half of our casework, and quite often, what the things that come up are, lack of adjustments and also sickness absence triggers. And to me, that's grossly unfair. And other things that are problematic then is, interviews can be tricky. You know, if somebody doesn't get there, I noticed there was a question earlier on about disability confidence schemes. So we may come to that, but an interview should be accessible. You know, and where possible, absolutely. And then things like that help disabled people. And I mean, other things. I mean, the difficulty is, you know, people can tell at interview, they can tell by the advert, they can tell by the interview, and it sometimes feels if people are determined to be discriminate against you, they will. And sometimes it will be around sickness absence trigger, and sometimes it can be around general capability. So it's a bit of a worry. But we want workplaces that are positive about disabled people and that are accessible. And that's really what some of the things we're talking about today.
Thanks, Colleen. And final question I wanted to raise with you before we move on to Martin is about respect in the workplace. What can we sort of culture can we foster? Obviously, reps can work towards this, but employers have the main, the overall responsibility for respect in the workplace towards disabled colleagues.
Okay, so first of all, a matter of training. A lot of people, as part of their package, as part of their adjustments package, get training for their colleagues, which is great, isn't it? I mean, we do as educators. My colleagues do quite a lot of work with young people in the workplace, which is great. So they sort of educate children about inclusion, which is wonderful, but training for colleagues really about disability equality so that we avoid this idea of, why are they being favoritized or whatever. So that's one of the things. And respect also I mean, I know none of the reps on this call would do this, but it's really difficult to, you shouldn't go up to somebody and say, do you think you're disabled? Because that's not a good idea. You can talk about long-term health conditions. You can talk about have you ever had your fitness to work questioned if you're an educator, that sort of thing. But yeah, so a lot can be achieved with a good culture. So thank you for asking me that question, Anna.
You're very welcome. No problem at all. So obviously Quinn is still with us. Colleen's going to stay with us as well to when we get to look at some questions that you, the audience, are putting to us. So now I've got a few questions for Martin. And Martin is from Unite, also co-chair with Colleen of the TUC's Disabled Workers Committee. Now, Martin has got a lot of experience of working directly with supporting individuals in the workplace via the union. So I'm going to ask him some questions about that specific casework that I'm sure all of you in the audience have got some experience of, or maybe going to do so, and that's why you're here with us today. So first of all, Martin, we think in these situations, trust is going to be really important between the member and the rep. So how can reps go about building that trust in the first place?
Hello, everybody. Just to say, trust is something really, that old-fashioned phrase that you've got to earn it, and it really does come down to that. It's actually letting the member know everything you're talking about is confidential unless they want you to pass something on or otherwise, but you're always discussing them, what their needs are, what you're trying to do for them, and what possible next actions you could take on their behalf, and are they okay with that? So it's about them being involved from all the way through when they disclose to you that there is an issue. And it's also personally, from my point of view, it's not the same for everybody, but I always, uh, whenever I'm delivering training or in the when I'm walking around talking to people, I let them know sometimes that I am dyslexic. I do struggle with certain things, and I'm quite open. But that's not easy for everybody to do. So sometimes it's your own personal style and what you feel comfortable talking about to that individual as much as anything else. But I'd also say where trust is concerned, it's also about creating the parameters and not promising something to somebody which you cannot help or support on. Make sure you've got those set guidelines there that, yes, I can help you with this, and the person knows what you can help with and what you can. That is a clear thing. If you suddenly say, I can do this and you can, it's a real lack of trust starts to build up within that member towards yourself. So it's always be clear of the expectations of what is possible, what's not possible, and where you're going. but constantly involving them all the way through that process.
That's some great advice, Martin. And I think we'd say this for almost any situation a rep finds. And
Yeah,
we love to think we can solve every workplace problem out there, but we can't. So I think that setting parameters and managing expectations really
yeah,
will help build trust, because when we've got trust, we're more likely to have the disclosure and the confidence that member would have a confidence in coming to the rep in the first place. So, can you talk to us a bit now about supporting members when a rep is supporting a member with a discrimination claim that might be based on bullying related to their disability?
First off, is make sure, I would always say, try and make sure that you've set enough time for that individual to discuss it with you. Make sure you've got time. The last thing you want to be doing is telling them you've got to rush off somewhere or anything else. So maybe look at when you're scheduling in to make sure that you've got time to listen to them. And it's also about making sure that it's in a private environment. Some people might not want, uh, they don't want to talk in a canteen area to you. They want to talk somewhere private. It can be emotional to some people how they're feeling. Be a little bit prepared for that because it can hit you as much afterwards as you're seeing the individual being hit by some of the things which you get told are quite horrific. So take notes all the way through. Try and get them, if they're going back into that environment, encourage them to take notes going forward. Dates, times, places, who was there, what was said, what happened, and how it made them feel. I think these are sometimes crucial things we forget, how it's making you feel. So to try and get that evidence up together is well to support it. It's also about being sympathetic and understanding and trying to look at it from their point of view. It's not always easy, but it is trying to look at it from their point of view and understanding. And then it's also, exactly as I said before, it's reporting back to them, trying to say to them what we can do and where we can go. And that is some of the key main elements. Is what we should be doing for all our cases, like you said, but around discrimination cases, it's just being that little bit sensitive to what the person may be feeling and how they're feeling about it. It can really traumatize people if that bullying's been going on for a while. It can really affect their self-esteem. And there is some evidence around showing that in the past, people don't necessarily think is the manager or the organization much may be causing discrimination. It could be them. They're the problem, and they're made to feel the problem. And it's letting them know they're not the problem. This, you know, we need to address this. This is an organizational system problem or is it individual problem? We need to sort this out and move it forward. And it is that reassurance that it's not you is a key point when you're going through it. Because there will be doubts in their mind where they think, oh, it's me, it's me. And it's that reassurance constantly all the way through.
Thanks, Martin. So my next question is about how we can perhaps make these cases stronger, and it's going to be about collectivization of equality issues or disability issues in this case. We often say to reps about any subject, there's rarely going to be one person with that problem. If you look around the workplace, there's going to be more than one. So what experiences have you got in collectivizing equality or specifically disability issues?
There's the experience sometimes you will have in different organizations. And I would say if you've got a chance, build up a disability working group with your employer so you can look at the issues and start actually presenting them with the issues and how are we going to work as together to solve them. So you can do it in that format. Some employers are going to obviously be reluctant to go down that route, but the other side of it would be to actually start whatever the grievances. Maybe you've had one come in, two or three come in on a certain thing about the manager not wanting to put desks in, rise desks or chairs in, and it's a particular area you may be having a problem with, then it's doing a collective grievance around these particular issues that you're noticing there's an area of concern, and we need to actually write this down. And it can be that you're putting it in as the collective, and there's obviously a lot more strength, more than one. But you can take it to some of your senior meetings. It may be that it's actually forming part of their well-being, which then falls underneath health and safety. So you're taking it to your health and safety committee and rising it through those committees as well.
Thanks for that, Martin. And you know, often in training that we at the TUC put out, we've got lots of guidance about how you make issues collective, or how you gather evidence for that. You might want to map your workplace, you know, make a plan of where everyone sits or where everyone is based in the workplace. That will give you an idea of where different problems are, where issues might be coming up in the future. And hopefully, fingers crossed, that will give you an opportunity to be proactive rather than always reactive. Because I think a lot of the time it might feel like there's lots of problems coming at you at once, but you can hopefully use some of these tools and methods to get a little bit ahead of the game. Right, I'm going to look at some of the questions now that have come in over the course of the webinar, and I've been jotting down a couple that have appeared in the chat if they've not gone on in the Q&A panel. So I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. So we've mentioned a little bit about the disability confidence scheme. I think that was mentioned a bit earlier on. What do the panel think about this scheme, whether it's fit for purpose, or do we need to have some different penalties for employers? Whoever's going to answer this one, maybe, who should I come to on that? Quinn, fantastic. Could you give us a couple of sentences first on what it is, just in case not everyone's aware?
Sure. So disability confident is a scheme the previous government set up to try and promote employers to take on best practice. It's really a carrot versus a stick. So, you know, you start to be a disability confident member. There are 3 levels. You get to say on all of your promotional material, I'm disability confident. I'm, you know, signing up to these commitments. And then the idea was that, you know, you would be level 1. And I think, you know, when we looked at what you need to do to be level 1, there was really not much in it. And then you wanted to kind of move up to level 2 with some deeper commitments and then eventually get to level 3. But the question here is it fit for purpose? And the short answer is no. It is not fit for purpose. All the research that I had seen that looks at its impact in terms of recruitment and retention and promotion of disabled workers showed that it has zero impact. But we are giving employers like this seal, this, you know, this badge of honor. So no, I don't think it's effective. I think there are lots of conversations happening on if it should be completely closed down and replaced with something that's got more teeth, or should we try and rejig it so actually you need to show proof of progress on these key issues. Um, and quite frankly, I go with either of those as long as what we end up with is a scheme that actually does improve employer practice. But what we have right now is something that is not, um, the evidence shows is not doing that, unfortunately.
Thanks, Quinn. We mentioned, maybe it was touched on a little bit earlier, about disabilities that are invisible or not visible at first sight. Can we have a bit of a discussion about those? Firstly, does someone with a hidden disability need to inform their employer or their manager? Colleen, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Hi, yeah. I mean, it's, you know, there are lots and lots of different non-apparent impairments, you know, and it all depends, really, the nature of the workplace, that how welcoming it is and how inclusive it is. And I'd like to think a good workplace, people could talk about their needs, what, you know, what the barriers are for them in that workplace. Because even though on first sight, it might be, well, you know, you might think, well, you can't see the issue. You know, if I choose to keep quiet, then everything will be okay. And I understand that. That says a lot about our society, doesn't it? But the issue is, as you progress within the workplace, within your job, then those barriers can become an issue, or you will have a crisis point. And then your employer doesn't have much knowledge about you. And so that's difficult. With some people, they don't have that choice. It's really obvious at interview or at first meeting that that person is a disabled person. That's a whole different kettle of fish. But if somebody, for example, has there's all manner of different impairments. Could be to do with, you know, um, you know, could be to do. There could be neurodivergent worker. There could be somebody that's got issues around, got an impairment related to digestion or using the bathroom or all manner of things. And so it's not realistic. And the issue is, the best example I've heard about this is that interview. You say, look, you know, I've got these impairments. I'm a disabled worker. And because I've got these impairments, I've had to be really well planned, really flexible, really well organised. And I deal with all these things. So actually, you kind of, you sell the whole of yourself at interview. And, because disabled people do have to organise things like travel and all manner of things, equipment and all manner of things. But the issue is, I understand why people don't self-ID sometimes if they've got an non-apparent impairment, but it's in the long term, it's not tenable, I think.
Thanks, Colleen. Quinn and Martin, did anything you wanted to add? Oh, yeah, go for it, Martin.
Yeah, just I get where people's coming from about not disclosing. I can talk about some past experience. I won't go on. It's a different employer to one I'm with now, but in the past, I disclosed I was dyslexic, and overnight, I ended up not being treated the same. I missed out on trips. It was a real shock, and it took me a lot of years until I eventually worked with my new employer and also became a union rep for Unite that I started feeling confident enough to disclose it. And my new employer's been brilliant about it and everything. But I remember when I first started there, I wouldn't disclose because of the manager I had at that particular moment in time. And it took a lot of years for me to build over that. So I understand it can be really difficult. So I get it. You don't have to necessarily disclose, but we do try to. We would love more people to disclose, but it's down. Sometimes I get that you may feel scared, and hopefully through the help of your rep, you could possibly disclose to your employer. But it is hard. It's not easy sometimes, especially if you've had trauma from previous employers where you've been treated differently going forward. So I really do get it where people are coming from with that.
Thanks, Martin. Go on, Quinn.
Oh, yeah. So I just wanted to add as well, in terms of your branch executive committee and your work with employers, it's always about working with the employer to make sure their culture is correct and it's set in a way which enables disabled workers to be open and honest. And so that's, things like getting them to acknowledge, for example, Disability History Month, or getting senior leaders to be clear that they are disabled. And that sends a signal, throughout the whole organization that this is one that will be appropriate. And I think, once you get the culture right, more disabled workers will be able to disclose. So I just thought I'd add that to the two great contributions already.
No, absolutely. Okay, we've had a bunch of questions around, and I'm going to try and combine them around neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, and other related conditions. We've had people commenting saying that for many years, these were perhaps misunderstood. Now there is more awareness of these diagnoses or these situations. But what advice do you all have for an approach that could work better, helping individuals with neurodiverse conditions during representations? Yeah, Colleen, do you want to kick us off? And then I know, Martin, you've got a specific experience. We'll come to you next.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, whether you refer to, difference or, long-term health condition or impairment, we're talking about the same thing essentially. And we're talking about neurodivergent workers. And a lot, things are a lot better in terms of, understanding, not necessarily in support. I've got to say, there's a lot to be done in terms of support and but the understanding now is coming. I know we've worked with some of our neurodivergent members. We've had a round table and we've produced a piece within our NEU disability equality toolkit of the issues some of our members have faced in the workplace and possible ways of overcoming those issues, basically by making the workplace better, because the barriers are in the workplace. And so really just thinking really, about giving people notice of meetings, giving them things like, summary points in written form, not expecting everybody to function in the same way. Just because most people do something in a certain way doesn't mean to say that everybody has to, and that sort of thing. I'm going to leave it there because Martin has got a more personal answer for this, I'm sure.
Thank you, Colleen. Martin, what can you add?
Bear with me. Right. From my experiences over the years, industry is now, businesses, organizations are on a catch up around this subject. And I've been for a good few years. We are now, people are understanding a little bit more. Our brains are complex things, and all of ours were slightly different. And even though I'm dyslexic, some people think, oh, you're probably not very good with numbers. I'm very good with numbers. It's understanding that individuality of that neurodivergent person on what's their strengths, what's the weaknesses, how can those strengths really help progress them. If you're a neuro-affirming company, people wouldn't recognize if you're what they call a neuro-affirming company, which basically means you support people who are neurodivergent in the workplace. We know the evidence shows that their profits have increased by 25%. So that's a real incentive for businesses to get behind this and start looking at how they can support people. It can be as simple as maybe thinking about how that room is designed, that office is designed going forward, lighting around it, because it can be oversensory. I personally hate white desks. I cannot stand the glow back from the white. It really does affect me quite a bit. And it's about thinking around things like this. How do we work it? I would always try and say, if you're an organization, you can, whenever your organization is building new premises, try and get involved with them doing a quality impact assessment, but do it around how that building's going to be built in the future. That new building's built. Is it accessible? Has it got a quiet room? Has it got a multi-sensory room? Or has it got one which can be adapted into either of those? So it's about thinking about it as well, building it into the future. And that's one of my biggest gripes, is that we're not looking necessarily going forward at planning regulation and making sure that buildings, offices, when they have refits, factories, they're built with the knowledge which we're learning around different disabilities and increasing their accessibility. It's a bit long-winded, but hopefully got a point.
It's fantastic and really practical suggestions, Martin. I think it's really helpful to hear from real experience of something you've done or that you've heard about has happened. Well, I'm very aware we've had a lot of questions and we're not going to be able to get through all of them, but if we don't get to your question, we don't just ignore it. We will use what you ask us to inform what information we put out. My team will work with Quinn on how we can answer these questions for you, and we'll find a forum to do it. So we will get to them, but I'm going to take a look at a couple of others now. We've had a load of questions, not surprisingly, about reasonable adjustments. So we've talked about the time it takes to get them. And specifically, someone has asked, bearing in mind we've got evidence of these really ridiculously long time periods, what are thoughts on the deadline for taking legal action around failing to put these in place, whether we've got any evidence or examples of that? And also, can we have a bit of a discussion about an employer who might remove a reasonable adjustment and citing business needs? Quinn, as we talk, because some of this maybe relates to the research, do you want to maybe say if anything came up before we go to Colleen and Martin?
So it's interesting about the timelines for putting in place reasonable adjustments. So I think everyone here should know that the TUC is a signatory to the Disability Employment Charter, which calls for the government to introduce a 2-week window for putting in place reasonable adjustments. I think that's really ambitious. I think most reasonable adjustments can be put in place in that timeline, but there are some more complicated ones that cannot. However, we just think, based on the fact that 1 in 5 disabled workers never hear back, if there's a legislative requirement and that legislative requirement then forces an employer to say, we've heard your request, unfortunately we can't do it within 2 weeks, even that's a win. So we're very happy for that. I think in terms of taking legal action, there's no law in place at the moment kind of denoting how quickly one has to do it. I think obviously the last thing anyone wants to do is go to employment tribunal. So really, if reps can be working with their members, disabled members, to um, to put pressure on the employer to put them in place before that, that would be much better. We know employment tribunals are really difficult for everyone involved, and that frequently the member is, really emotionally traumatized at the end, so we don't want to get there. However, all that said, I do think we need to continue to hold employers to account for failures in this space. And I think that that would be a question that you would need to put to a lawyer, to ask, is now right? Have we done, has the trade union done, has the member done everything that is reasonable in this space to a point now where it's no longer reasonable and we can go to the next level? But again, I do think that's the last protocol.
Thanks, Quinn. Martin.
Just to say as well that we often hear that phrase, business needs. It's a quite common thing. If you want a holiday, sometimes it can be even business needs thrown up then. But
We hear it all the time.
all
So yeah.
the time. But we need to delve into that. And one of the things sometimes will be around the cost, so we can't afford it. And sometimes I've heard not from my employer, but from other people's sectors around the fact that they're talking we can't afford it, and they're talking about a department. They're saying our department can't afford it. And we need to maybe look at it's the overall company's money, not a department's. When they say they financially can't afford it, and we sometimes have seen this with councils, and they talk just about the department. So bear that in mind. It's the entire organisation's funds, not just your department.
Colleen, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's this whole thing about adjustments I find really interesting. There's something that happens really very often is that a worker can have their reasonable adjustments, okay, and they'll be thriving, they'll be going along, and everything's great. It's like, they're getting on really well at work. And then for some reason, some managers think that then they'll just take them away. They almost treat them like they're a phased thing and they take them away. And then, surprise, surprise, the work struggles and starts to fail in their, well, they just they're not productive, they struggle, whatever. And that's really common. That happens really, really often. And another thing that happens really often is a change of manager or a change of a teacher. And that can just create such a huge problem. And that relates to how people think about reasonable adjustments and how so much of it is a matter of mindset, really. It's not just business needs. It's business needs are, that's an issue in itself, but I do think, something that Quinn was referring to earlier, this thing about collectivizing things, and Martin said it as well. So one disabled person not getting their reasonable adjustments should not be standing alone, not getting their needs met. Everybody in that workplace should be saying, hang on, we're not having this. We're not having that worker being treated like that. Because then it becomes everybody's issue and everybody's together. And then other things are dealt with in the same way, whether it's pay, whether it's workload, whether it's any equality issue. Workers stand together and say, sorry, this needs addressing. Then we all, everybody together is happy and gets on, and issues are addressed. Because I think that brings things into a sharp focus. Because, the individual casework approach, the tribunal approach is very isolating, and often, people will leave or it will settle before it gets, very far. Lots of cases do settle before anything else. But, this idea of collectivizing, we can't do enough of it, I think.
Absolutely, and thank you, Colleen. And it also that brings us back to one of the first points that we made nearly an hour ago about building trust in the workplace to allow the self ID and to allow the disclosure, because we're not going to be able to collectivize issues without that trust being there, that someone feels comfortable and confident enough to know that they'll get that support. So I guess what I'm saying is everything we've been talking about is cyclical in many ways. Okay, I think we're going to have one more question before we look to wrap up. What advice have you got for increasing understanding and access around fluctuating or dynamic conditions and impairments? I'm going to assume this to mean conditions that are maybe different day to day or week to week. You're nodding, so yeah, I'm correct. So I've learned as well. So, Colleen, why don't you start us off on this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I learned about this the best with the children at school. It might be a youngster that's got intermittent hearing loss. Some days they're great, and other days they can't hear you very well at all. And, other days again, not a thing. So I learned about this in the workplace, this idea of fluctuating needs. And, we see it with members that have got, impairments or differences that affect their levels of energy. And there's lots of those around now as well, like fibromyalgia and long COVID, extremely important, issues to understand. And this is where the reasonable adjustment passport is really helpful, where you talk about yourself on a good day and yourself on a less good day. And so you educate your employer to the fact that you're not the same every day. You're not dealing with the same issues every day. And that understanding is really helpful.
Thanks, Colleen. Martin, is there anything you wanted to add on that point, or just to wrap up for today?
Yeah, hopefully this has been really useful to people. But one of the things I will say is an adjustment isn't just the adjustment you necessarily going to have all the way through your work career. It's worth reviewing it now and then. If things have changed for you as an individual with a disability, you need to raise that with your rep and say, look, this has happened. The passport I got is no longer fit for purpose. Can we have a look at it? So just be aware that things change and they're not always stagnant. And we sometimes do need to look at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. I'm going to ask each of our panelists just to give us some closing words in a minute. There's just a couple of things I want to say first. Even though it's December, this is not our last webinar of the year. Next week, we have one that's a bit different, actually. We're doing a webinar with Unity Trust Bank, who some of you will have heard of, some of you it may be new to, but they are a bank used by a lot of unions, by a lot of branches, and crucially, they were established by unions, and the money they hold is used in perhaps a different way than what you're used to. So do join us next week. I think it's next Wednesday, whatever the day the 10th is, next Wednesday, where we'll be joined by a panel from Unity Trust Bank, talking you through some of the practicalities of banking, as well as the good that the bank does as well. So yeah, great to see some of you have said you have already signed up. So yeah, you'll see me next week, but you won't see Colleen, Martin and Quinn. They're not involved in banking, but I'm going to get each of them just to say a couple of words to finish. Quinn, do you want to go first?
Sure, I just want to say thank you for taking part. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you about these really important issues. One of the things I think you mentioned, Anna, that I really want to emphasize as being really helpful is the TUC Reasonable Adjustments Disability Passport. It is a low-key, low-tech way of systematizing reasonable adjustments and dealing with everything we've talked about, including fluctuating health conditions. So if that is something you're considering or interested in, have a look, free on the website. Thanks.
Thanks, Quinn. Colleen?
Yeah, I'd just say, become a very politicized disabled person, get collectivize around a social model of disability. We are disabled by the barriers in society. Work together. Have a look at the NEU Disability Equality Toolkit. We've recently been looking at adjustments for folks with endometriosis and adenomyosis. So, there is lots to do. There's always lots of work to do, and our strength as a group is immense. So, thank you for the invitation today, TUC.
And thank you, Colleen. And Martin?
Yes, thank you for the invitation today, and I hope everybody found it useful. I would like to say just it's never easy dealing with these things. And one of the things we need to remember, we need to take care of ourselves as much as anything else when we're dealing with our members. So try and find some way to have a debrief, or if your union has got a line to connect to afterwards to have a chat to somebody, it's worth doing it and making a note of it. Because sometimes these things can be really horrific, which you're hearing, and sometimes we do just need to download and take care of ourselves, because we can't take care of our members if we're not healthy ourselves. Thank you.
That is such excellent advice, Martin. All that leaves me to say is thank you all so much for joining us. You've been a fantastic audience and really, really great insights and questions. Thank you to Martin, Colleen, and to Quinn. And we'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye for now.